a culture will always exist. It's just whether it's by default or by design.
Welcome to The Benefit Shift, the show where smarter benefits meet real-world business challenges. Each episode, we sit down with HR leaders, finance pros, and workplace innovators to explore how organizations are transforming PTO from a liability into a strategic asset. From compliance tips to retention wins, this is your guide to unlocking the true value of time. Let's rethink benefits, 1 hour at a time.
Welcome to The Benefit Shift, the podcast where we explore the future of employee benefits and how they're evolving to meet the needs of a changing workforce. I'm your host, Josh Reinhard from PTO Exchange. And as you know, each episode, we talk with different HR leaders, benefit innovators, workplace change makers to uncover what's working and what's next in employee experience. And today we're taking a closer look at the hospitality industry. So a sector that's known for its people-first culture, but also some unique workforce challenges. So really, let's get into it. Joining me on today's podcast is Dan Waite, currently from Westgate. Dan's background is leading human resources, now at Westgate Resorts, and people and culture roles at some of the most groundbreaking companies in hospitality. So Dan, thanks so much for joining Benefit Shift.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful in the context of these kind of conversations for you to just give us a little bit of background on some of the roles you've had, some of the experience you have, and we'll talk a little bit more about how it relates to what's going on in HR and hospitality today.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Josh. So, my background is pretty diverse, mostly in luxury and lifestyle hotels, and was fortunate enough to run human resources for some companies like Starwood Hotels with brands like One Hotels and Baccarat and Treehouse. And also I was the senior vice president for Make Ready for people and culture before joining my current role, which is the regional director of HR for Westgate for the Mid-Atlantic region here.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about Westgate, just some of those other brands and names of hotels I'm sure people are familiar with? It would be great to hear a little bit more about Westgate.
Yeah, Westgate is great. The largest privately held timeshare company in the world. So we have resorts throughout the United States, and with a recent acquisition of VI Resorts, we also have resorts in Hawaii and Mexico and Canada and throughout the United States. So about 65 properties throughout the United States are resorts, and all timeshare. But we have the best of both worlds. There's timeshare component, and then we also have our transient, kind of like a more traditional resort experience, but with full bathrooms, full kitchens, full living rooms, and in all of the resorts. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that's awesome. How did you get into, how did you get into HR? How did you specifically get into HR and hospitality?
Yeah, I always kind of joke that I got into hospitality HR by mistake. My background, I was a personnel officer in the United States Navy. And then after the Navy, I met my wife, and she was pursuing her degree in hospitality management. And she was doing an internship at a hotel. And they said, we need someone who knows computers but knows HR. And she said, I should talk to my husband. And so that was nearly 30 years ago. And here I am.
Yeah, I feel like most people get into their careers by accident. I don't think that's super rare. That's kind of funny story. And I guess in your experience, you've been at some names, hospitality names that we're super familiar with, Starwood Hotels being one, obviously, that most people probably have stayed at a Starwood Hotel property in their life, and then a little more boutique on the Make Ready side. So what's some of the differences you've seen in some of the stops that you've had in your career?
Yeah, so I think, all of my career has really been about the experience. So my experience with Starwood is different than the Starwood of 10 years ago. The founder of Starwood sold the company to Marriott, 15 or 20 years ago, and has since relaunched. He kept the Starwood name and then relaunched recently. It was SH Hotels and Resorts when I was there, and recently, renamed to Starwood Hotels. But even those hotels, they have a point of view. They have a very unique culture. They're just very bespoke, not like a traditional. I never worked at a traditional like Marriott or Hyatt or Hilton, which there's obviously great success in those brands, but mine has been more in luxury and lifestyle brands where there's a culture and a point of view and a point of differentiation and all of those things that make it fun.
Yeah, yeah. And I know we've talked about this in the past, just because now we've had a few different interactions along our journey here at PTO Exchange. But yeah, I think you have a very interesting and unique approach or thought on the way culture plays in to HR and the way that it ultimately reflects the way that you treat your employees and that you support your employees. And if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit more about that, just because I think it's an interesting
Well,
approach.
it's fascinating because culture is really my passion, it impacts every area. And I have a boss and mentor that always just say that everything communicates. Everything communicates, and it either reinforces your culture or undermines it. And so, I look at things as basic when you talk about culture is in the hospitality industry, like most industries, people spend millions and millions of dollars on the customer or the guest experience, right? They in a hotel, it starts with a porte cochere. And so when someone pulls up to the hotel, what is the feeling that you're trying to invoke? And what is the music and the design and the lighting and all of this? And what I encourage people to do is look at your employee arrival experience. And typically that's backed by the loading dock and the dumpster and the security. And so if everything communicates, it communicates to your team as well as it communicates to the guest who's coming in the beautiful lobby arrival experience. And so my approach has been, how do you fix that and closer align it? Because if you're a one hotel or if you're a Westgate Resort, you don't have two different experience. There's one brand, right? It's not one brand for the employees and a different brand for
right.
guests. And so how does your internal brand communicate the external brand? And
Yeah.
I always kind of jokingly say, you give me someone's employee arrival experience and their dining experience, and I'll tell you what their culture is, because it will communicate how they care about their team member experience.
Yeah. I think that's just such a big part. And there's, kind of, we transitioned the conversation into a little bit more about some of the specific challenges in the hospitality space. I think that overarching idea of culture and how you affect the employee experience to ultimately affect the buyer experience for the people that are coming to these hotels is really interesting. So kind of through that lens, when you think of some of the challenges, some of the realities that there are in HR for hospitality companies, just for listeners of the podcast, can you give them an idea of what's the expectation? What do employees see? What are some of the challenges that you saw in your seat as a CHRO, as a VP of HR?
Yeah, it's interesting because we have every level within the organization that we're dealing with. So I'm dealing with the newest room attendant with English as a second language to vice presidents and CEOs and everyone in between, looking at their development, their growth, their experience. And so, some of the things that we face in hospitality is a lot of English as a second language, or people entering as an entry level, or even someone entering after college or high school that says, well, I'm just going to do this until I can find a real job. And, I always like to talk to people and say, listen, so when you start here, anything that you can think of in the outside world, outside of hospitality, whether it's architect, design, finance, IT, you name it, we have within the hospitality industry.
Yeah.
So yes, this can just be a gig until you get another gig, or this can be a career. And our job is to help you get there, right? So if your goal is you want to be an architect and you're currently starting in housekeeping, my goal is how do we inspire that? How do we create space for that person to become what they want to do?
Yeah, that's such an interesting concept too, because I've never really thought about it until you really said it so plainly there. But a lot of the HR leaders at companies that we're talking to, I mean, the employee population is multi-generational, certainly, but some of the jobs aren't that varied. It's like levels of seniority within an organization, but like an architecture firm, which is like an example you just gave. Almost everyone that works at the firm is an architect. That's their job in their profession. But when it comes to hospitality, you have the restaurant, You have the folks that are cleaning rooms. You have folks that are trying to sell. You have senior level management. You have finance folks. Like you have everybody within the organization, and you, as the leader of HR, have to care about each of those groups of people.
Absolutely. And then you get the people that are designing the restaurants and the people that are building the hotels and, all of that. It's fascinating work for sure.
Yeah. So how do you think about like, when an outsider thinks of the hospitality industry, we think of it as an industry that tends to have high turnover, but I guess that's probably with just like specific roles within the organization. But how do you see that as a challenge, as a reality? What are you doing to address those types of challenges when you're thinking about the roles that you've had?
It goes back to culture for me, right? Years ago, I worked in Miami at this crazy hotel called Delano and with Morgan's Hotel Group. And, I used to tell people that it was easier to get into Harvard than it was to get a job with us. So we hired about 1 in every 1,000 candidates that applied, which was about, 1 in every 10,000 that went to our website, and then 1,000 actually applied. But it's really about creating, a great experience, for the team members there. And the really great companies get that right. That it starts with what is the culture that we're trying to create? If that's the culture, then where do we need to go to find those people? Mm-hmm. And once we find those people that are a fit with what we're trying to do, how do we onboard them in a manner that matches that fashion? And then once we onboard them, how do we have this engaging environment where we can grow them and do succession planning and promote them? And so it's that foundational stuff. But, turnover, in our industry has been huge since the pandemic. It was for a little while, I think we were all struggling with finding candidates. And I would say now that the struggle is more with finding the right candidates for the right place. And in the hospitality industry, I can tell you that someone who might be a great candidate for a Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton might be different than someone for 1 Hotels or Westgate. Mm-hmm. And so it's, it used to be a server is a server is a server, but when you have that, you really just become a commodity, mm-hmm. right? And people are going to go to wherever the pay is higher or the hours are better versus that's a company I want to grow with.
Yeah. But that keeps going back to what you started with, which is the intersection of brand and culture. And yes. You have to have the employees care about where they are. They have to be a fit for where they are, and it needs to make sense. But I guess kind of taking that to the next level of thinking about what employees are a good fit and what do you do to help retain employees. A lot of folks that join our podcast are here to listen about benefits. This is the Benefit Shift. So we'll talk a little bit about benefits in hospitality. So where do you see the focus both from a talent acquisition perspective and from a retention perspective specific to hospitality?
Yeah, I think the better your talent acquisition is in getting the right folks, the lower your turnover is going to be. I mean, I think it's really about finding the right people. It's, retention for me starts with hiring the right people and then caring for them, mm-hmm. right? Of genuine, I always say the difference between, in our industry, between guest service and a great experience is an employee who cares, yeah. right? Because anyone can open a door and say, my pleasure. And it's another one that says, oh, I see you have a bag there. Can I help you with that? It's just a totally different person. And, neither one's good or bad. They're just what's the right fit for you.
Yeah. But thinking about how to excite that employee and make sure that they're happy where they are and that they're going the extra mile for your customer. When you think of kind of like the benefits that are being offered in today's world, it does kind of feel like the things that get the attention or the things that get the biggest, that have the biggest dollar value associated with them are kind of medical benefits, medical, dental, vision, the big benefit that employers are looking at. But that seems to me, at least, to be kind of like table stakes today. And yeah. It's certainly something that someone's looking at when they're applying for the job is what kind of benefits am I going to get and how much of it is being covered by my company. But that's not what differentiates, in my opinion, that's not really what like differentiates the total reward strategy that companies have. Do you see it the same way? Do you see it differently?
Yeah. I'd say that the medical, dental, even 401k those are rules to the game, but that's not how you win the game. Those are although it costs you millions and millions of dollars a year for
Right.
your medical, dental, vision, nobody says, wow, they have a great dental plan. It, great. You have dental? Good. We're in.
Right.
It's those other things that we offer that I always try to, I think of outside the box of even things like medical benefits. So I was meeting with our broker, a few years ago, and they said, you know what, well, our rates are going to go up 14% this year because we had a very high prescription med costs. And in order to cover those for the following year. And I said, all right, so here's what I want to do. I want to give away free generic prescriptions. And they're like, wait a second, your rates are going up and you want to give away free generic prescriptions. I said, well, it's a carrot or a stick, right? And I would rather give them a carrot to say, hey, it's to your benefit that this is free if you want to go get, but it's a very counterintuitive thinking that, our broker was like, I love your thinking because if you can get even half of these people to switch from name brand to generic, your prices are going to be cut in half.
Right. And it feels like a win to the employee also. For
Yeah,
them.
and the employees are like, oh my God, I went to the pharmacy and they said I didn't know anything.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And so I think it's things like that. I mean, it's crazy here. So I'm based out of Gatlinburg, Tennessee right now. And so for us, nobody says, wow, you offer medical benefits. What they say is, wow, you offer $10 tickets to Dollywood? Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't cost us a dime, but they're jazzed about these $10 tickets to Dollywood. But meanwhile, we're paying a couple $1 million a year in medical benefits and don't get one while out of it.
Right.
Other than when they're not happy that something didn't get paid.
Right, exactly. Yeah. There's no upside, only downside. But when we know those kind of traditional benefits, the medical benefits, that makes up more than 25% of the total benefit pie. I think the number each year is in the U.S. alone, private companies are spending $850 billion on insurance every year. That's only 26% of the pie. That's what gets a lot of the attention and a lot of the focus, but that's only a quarter of what's being spent. So what are some of the other, when you're thinking of the kind of like wow benefits, what are some of the other things that you've seen and had success with in your career that do make a difference for employees?
Well, listen, I can tell you, I know this is sponsored by PTO Exchange, but I have to tell you that the honest truth of what happened is back, I think it was in 2018, I saw a video that your founder was doing, and I was like, oh my God, that's the smartest thing I've ever seen in my life because, the golden rule used to be treat others the way you want to be treated. And, over the last 15 years, that's changed. That the golden rule is to treat people the way they want to be treated, right? So it's no longer that I want vacation time, so we're all going to get vacation time. Mm-hmm. It's, you know what, this is yours. You've earned it. You should be able to do what you want with it. And when I heard that thinking, it just resonated with me of, particularly in hospitality, there's a large portion of our population that under traditional PTO plans that can't take vacation. They have the time off, but they can't go anywhere because they don't have any money to do that. And so to give them the ability to say, hey, if you want to, trade in some of your PTO time to buy plane tickets, or you want to get a hotel, or this is yours. You should be able to do what you want with it. And you should be able to do what works for you. And then, the other part of that I truly, love that there's so many people that are getting out of college and entering our profession. And, someone will spend $80,000 going to college to go out and start a job making $40,000 a year and be stuck with student loan debt for the next 25 years. And so to be able to use, unused PTO time to pay off your student loan, I think that's brilliant. Or the older I get, the idea of being able to put money into my 401k is a pretty jazzy idea. Not that I thought 25 years ago that would ever be a sexy thing to do, but as I get older, that being able to put that money into a 401k versus just having PTO sitting in a bank. So PTO Exchange is, obviously, I'm a huge fan, but I think it's looking at things outside the box. And the other part with that of being a good partner to our finance team is that we were able to offer this incredible benefit without it costing us a dime, right? there's like a 7% administrative fee for the team member to use their time however they want to, which I think it's important. Like you said, when we look at our multi-million-dollar medical plans and, our medical and dental, I can't go into our finance team and say, okay, I want to start this $4,000 new, per team member benefit. It's just not going to fly.
Yeah. What's that conversation like, or what's that give and take that you have with finance in your career? What has that been like? Like I found this great new benefit. Now, PTO exchange aside, because like you said, we operate a little bit differently because there is no cost to the employer. It's more like a voluntary experience. But when you find that cool benefit, what's that conversation like with the CFO or the VP of finance?
Well, it's interesting. I'm probably different than some of the HR people that might be listening, that I really try to think more like a business person. And if this was my business, why would I do this? And it's different, having been a business owner and offering benefits to my employees that were coming out of my pocket. I look at what is the ROI. And sometimes it's not a measurable dollar sign ROI, but what is going to make us employer of choice? What's going to give me better options? And what's going to align with who we are? A funny personal story is when we were starting our business, we would have people come in after we opened, and they said, this place. So we were a senior center, and people would come in to visit, and they're like, my God, this place is so much fun. Everyone in here is laughing and having a good time, which is not the norm in a lot of senior centers. Mm-hmm. And I would tell them, listen, it's not by mistake, it's by design, that we hired people based on their values and who they are. So when I was interviewing nurses and RNs, I would, tell them, give me an example of the last time you had fun at work. Mm-hmm. And as I was interviewing nurses, they're like, listen, nursing's pretty serious and not always fun. It's rewarding. But I was interviewing one, and she said, well, it is hard and demanding work. She said, but in my off time, I'm a nationally recognized ventriloquist. So I go back in the evenings and I, bring my dummy, and I go and entertain the kids in the children's unit. Okay, you're hired.
Yeah, right. We found a winner.
Yeah. And it's like, I can't teach someone to be fun. And so, I think when you're looking at benefits, it's like, how do I attract that fun person? Mm-hmm. It's been like that at, every place that I work is what aligns with the culture that we're trying to create. With One Hotels and SH, when I was there and looking at PTO Exchange, it was really that we were a mission-driven company, that was, the first carbon neutral hotel company in the United States, and some really cool things around, wellness and the environment. And so one of the parts that really interested me with PTO Exchange is that you could donate your PTO to charities of your choice. Mm-hmm. So we had a huge population that wanted to help, make the planet a better place, and being able to do that by using your PTO time was great.
Yeah. One of the things we always encourage any of the HR leaders we're talking to is this idea of getting feedback from employees. And it sounds like you've had experience with that. What did you do in your roles to get that employee feedback? Was it as easy as a survey that goes out? How frequently did you do it? What was your best way of soliciting feedback from employees?
I'm kind of old school. How about just starting with go talk to them? It's a good start. Like, you don't have to do it through a survey or anything. Just, walk out of your office. So, just a funny story on that, Josh, is my whole HR team, here and in Williamsburg and Myrtle Beach and Orlando and our 5 locations here, all of my HR team has a directive that we have to make 2 tours a day. And so we want you out, touching the kitchens and the front desk and the sales office and the water park and all of the areas. And so, I think that's part of it. I always say that if I ever am surprised by my employee surveys, then I haven't done my job. Right. I should never be surprised if I'm out and in touch with what's going on. That being said, sometimes people do feel more comfortable with anonymity, being able to share something on there. And I think the biggest thing with surveys is really listening to the feedback. One, don't ask a question that you don't want the answer to. So Don't ask them how they like their benefits. If you're not going to change your benefits, then don't ask them the question.
Right, yeah.
Don't ask
Don't
them
patronize me with a question if you're not really going to do anything about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't ask me if you're happy with your pay, because if you are, that means we're paying you too much. But no, in all seriousness, it's about listening to the feedback and making meaningful change and then circling back and letting them know. Just interesting. I'm not a huge fan of annual surveys. I kind of look at it of when you go to McDonald's, they ask you for a survey every time you go. When you go to Home Depot, they ask you for a survey every time you go. Now, listen, 95% of the people will never take the survey, but they ask you, you would never, for any of those surveys, survey your customers for 1 week out of the year and then place all of your plans around that. Because the problems that they have in January are different than the problems that they have in June. In January, they're not getting enough hours. They can't feed their family. In June, it's I have no work-life balance. I'm working 70 hours a week. And so it's a different set of issues. So anyone who surveys people one time a year and thinks that you're really going to solve problems isn't, you can solve the big picture trend stuff, but the issues that face our team members at every level of the organization shift from day to day and week to week, just like they do for anyone going into any of those stores.
Yeah. I think you have an awesome perspective on it too. And I know just from our experience together and just from conversations we've had that, the idea of how important culture is to you seems to touch everything that you do and everything that we've ever talked about and everything, your interactions with PTO Exchange, certainly. But what other kind of advice would you have to other HR leaders, whether it's specific to hospitality or just like big picture?
Yeah, I would just two things. And I think I started with this, that a culture will always exist. It's just whether it's by default or by design, right? You put a group of people together and they will come up with norms and what they start to do, which starts to become the culture. And so you can either let that organically happen with a group of random people and it might work, or you can figure out what are the shared values that we want as an organization. And do we want, with another company, I had love, honor, respect, delight, and trust. And so that might look different at different places, but I can't teach those things. I can't teach love. I can't teach honor. So you really have to hire people that also, have that same shared set of values. And then the other thing that I would say, if you're really, wanting to shape culture, is one, do it purposeful. And what is the environment that you're trying to create? And then how do your systems support that? And like I said, everything communicates. Show me your employee entrance and show me your cafe or your cafeteria, your dining area. And that will tell you everything that you need to know about how you value your team. And unfortunately, and particularly in the hotel industry, a lot of the team member entrances in cafeterias are not how we would be mortified if one of our guests went back to those areas. Which I always laugh at our food and beverage team, because you go to the employee cafeterias and there's this awful fluorescent lighting like you have behind you there. There are these really uncomfortable chairs. There's these plastic tables. And I say we would never have that in one of our restaurants. We would never have that kind of lighting in our restaurants. Why do we have that there? We would never have those chairs in a guest area. Why would we have them there? We don't have two different brands. We have one brand.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think the really great companies get that right. And I think the other companies, it's a commodity.
Yeah.
There's a great video, if your listeners get a chance. Seth Godin, one of the brilliant marketers, talks about hotels. And he said, the difference between a logo and a brand, right? And if you're staying at a Hyatt or a Hilton or a Marriott in any city in America, and if they took the logos off, would you be able to tell what hotel you're staying at? And so what it tells you is they have a logo, they don't have a brand. However, if a company like Nike was going to design a hotel, you have a pretty good idea what it would look like,
Right. Yeah.
right? And that's because Nike has a brand. And so the companies that I have worked with and aligned myself with, if One Hotels was going to do a pair of shoes, you know what they would look like. They would be organic. They would be natural colors. They would be sustainable. And so, those great companies are the ones that aren't a commodity. All of those other ones that I talked about in a hotel, you're booking it based on either they have a loyalty program or it's closer to where you're going to be or it's cheaper. So it's a commodity. It's not that brand resonates with who you are. It's a logo with a location.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a interesting concept. And I think, again, it goes back to your kind of core mantra of like the culture needs to meet the brand, and it needs to be consistent throughout the entire organization. And like you said, not just at the entrance to the hotel, but in the employee break room, the staff that's cleaning the rooms needs to have the same experience as the ones that are sitting in the offices and in front of computers all day. So
Just one quick point on that, Josh. It was great. When I first started with SH Hotels, my first big company directive is, if you've ever gone to a One Hotel, the scent that they have in the lobby is amazing. I mean, it's hats off. The team did an amazing job with creating the One Hotel scent that essentially caught on all over the place. But at the team member entrance, like I said, it was at the loading dock. And so my very first assignment was fix your employee entrance. So we brought the scent machines out there. We brought the music out that we have in the lobby. We painted. We put some live plants at all of the team member entrances at all of our locations. And, like PTO Exchange, it didn't cost us much. We spent a couple $1,000s, but completely transformed how people arrived to work. They came in like, oh my God, this is beautiful. And it like sets the mood and sets the tone. And so, I think those are the things that really create culture and create value. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Dan, we need to wrap up today, but thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight on building smarter and more flexible benefits in the hospitality industry. We really appreciate your time today. It was really fun being with you.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh, and the team there at PTO Exchange. Really appreciate you guys.
Of course. And if you're inspired by what you heard today and want to learn more about how PTO Exchange can support your team, please visit ptoexchange.com or to get started or request a demo. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so others can find the show. With that, I'm Josh Reinhard, and I'll see you on the next shift. Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in to The Benefit Shift. If today's conversation sparked ideas or helped shift your thinking, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can also visit ptoexchange.com for more insights, resources, and upcoming episodes. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep building benefits that work better for everyone.